Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and werewolves. Killing and curing werewolves. Poor werewolves, whether in film or folklore, it always ends poorly for them, doesn't it? No tale of lycanthropy is complete without the death of its starring monster, or dark anti-hero. In film, it's usually a silver bullet that does the deed, accompanied by a dramatic return of the monster to human form, just before or after the death. In folklore, it's most often the tortures of the Inquisition that do the creatures in, surprisingly, and none of the imprisoned werewolves ever transform and fight back. Interesting. Well, so it's kind of like we're looking at a guide of a werewolf hunter, I suppose, I mean, have you ever watched Ginger Snaps? If you've ever seen the film Ginger Snaps, there was no silver bullet needed to kill the werewolf. There was no special dagger needed. There was actually no weapon ever involved in the werewolf dying in the first place. It got hit by a truck and obliterated. That, to me, is very realistic. I mean, why would we need a silver bullet? In the realm of vampire movies, the most well-known way to kill the undead is by exposing the creature to sunlight, and with a few exceptions. And this is an element people expect to see in their fiction. And it is fiction, okay? F.W. Murnau killed off his vampire in the 1922 film Nosferatu via sunlight in an attempt to avoid being sued by the Bram Stoker estate for completely lifting the Dracula storyline. While the trick didn't work, and Nosferatu, the film was itself ordered destroyed. Fortunately, a copy did survive. The sunlight idea caught on in pop culture and fiction. In most folklore, vampires can hunt by day or night if they really wish to, but the average person still doesn't know that. Here's where you're expecting, I suppose, to provide a story behind silver bullets, silver weapons, the use of such a substance like that. It's screenwriter's invention, right? A silver killing something that hunts by moonlight just sounds too Hollywood. No. As made for films as it sounds, the concept of a silver item being able to kill werewolves, straight from folklore, not the movies. The first recorded instance of silver being the go-to weapon comes from 1640, the werewolf epidemic that plagued the city of Greifswald. We have no way to account for the validity of these passed-down claims, of course. I mean, we just don't know, we weren't there. But according to local legends, the town was infested with the creatures. Werewolves were gradually outnumbering the humans and killing off the ones that remained. Granted, the tale was recorded about 200 years afterward, but it is astounding that an event that allegedly affected so many people was passed on for centuries without being challenged by locals. No one stepped forward to say that Grandpa wasn't really mauled by a wolf at all, for instance. Assuming to the 1640 event had at least some basis in fact, how was the plague dealt with? Surprisingly, by a group of students. They fought as best as they could and weren't doing so well, supposedly proving that these were no ordinary wolves. And then one of them decided to try something for a reason that has been lost to legend. This student suggested melting down all the silver they could find to manufacture what he hoped would be lethal balls for their muskets. He must have been inspired by something or other, because his bullets were lethal to the wolves indeed. These little balls of silver supposedly killed all of the entire werewolf population, both returning the town to the humans, and ensuring that silver would enter folklore forever. Later in the 1960s, there's a well-known story involving silver bullets, and the previously mentioned beast of Gévaudan, Jean Chastel, one of the hunters credited with killing the beast, testified that he shot the loup-garou using silver bullets made from a melted chalice that was blessed by a priest. It's unclear if he believed the silver itself had true significance from older tales such as Greifswald, or if he used the bullets because They were made from consecrated items that happened to be silver. Silver is traditionally associated with the moon in occult tradition. It could be that the first person to dream up the idea of using silver weapons against what he or she thought was a werewolf could have gotten the inspiration from a musty grimoire. Let's say that Greifswald really was the first werewolf event, where silver was used as a weapon. It's not impossible that a student in 1640 would have read some books on magic. It was the magical era after all. The line of reasoning used by a student, or maybe an even earlier werewolf hunter, probably evolved from the idea of like working on like in the occult world. If wolves hunted by the moon, perhaps the lunar metal had power over wolves as well. Such sympathetic links are an ancient staple of occultism and are in the use in this day. Modern practitioners of magic still apply the sympathetic principle when selecting the right colour candles. Or the scent of incense, even proper day of working. Yes, even days and weeks have associations. Monday is linked with the moon, for example, so it's a wonder that hunters didn't believe a silver bullet would work even better on that day. Such a pondering would have been a valid consideration for a superstitious hunter. So we can see why silver might have been used by hunters. Folklore doesn't like to agree with itself, though. For every use of silver as the only tool that will work, there are stories in which silver isn't mentioned and the werewolf meets his own demise, or her own demise. Despite some of the theories, werewolves were believed to be a vast majority of people that were physical creatures made of furry flesh and sharp teeth. As a result, it is not surprising that in most countries the methods for killing or hunting a werewolf were simple methods of brute force, which people didn't take into account, is that such methods wouldn't help them distinguish between werewolves and humans, or werewolves and real wolves, depending which form they attacked. The most popular way to kill a werewolf in the Middle Ages was also the preferred choice of dealing with witches, heretics, and basically anyone who offended the Inquisition. Most werewolves that become infamous were arrested in human form, tried in court, flawed as it was, and then sentenced to various forms of torture and death. There was no way to really know if these were supernatural beings having their skin peeled away slowly or bones broken on a wheel. No final proof of what tortures, or the torturers killed by beheading or burning it at the stake, or both. These were ways to kill people too. People back in the Middle Ages didn't know for sure if any of the methods would work against a werewolf while he or she was in wolf form, but they had records of it working every time when the accused was in human form. Note that they never had a chance to try any of these methods when the accused, or sometimes freely confessed werewolf, was in wolf form, because there's not a single court case or record ever where the prisoner turned into a wolf and tried to pounce out of the courtroom. The explanation offered for this lack of actual evidence didn't really bother the courts, though. Satan simply abandoned his servants. Once they were captured, Satan ran away, including the witches, and somehow killed at a distance, but couldn't even stop a single lash of a whip from hitting their backs. Think about that for a while. It does not make sense. And there you have it. In human form, once abandoned by the devil, werewolves can be killed like any other human. The devil must really hate courtrooms. Our best documented cases of alleged lycanthropy almost always ended in a courtroom. The rest of the legends usually had very vague outcomes, with the implication being that beasts could still be lurking in the woods. However, you went with what you knew must work. If werewolves could be killed in human form by the authorities using any physical weapons and torture devices on hand, then it followed logically that hunters should take to the woods armed with any weapons they'd use against real wolves. A select few hunters used silver, as we've already discovered and talked about, but in practice silver became a generic folk belief rather than something that was must-have on hunts. They were more likely to find silver mentioned in an old text rather than more recent texts after witch hunts and such alike. And it wasn't cheap after all. As non-mystical as this fact may be, hunters went in search of werewolves with their ordinary muskets, guns, swords, knives, pitchforks and other weapons, made from more affordable and easy-to-come-by metals. Telltale wounds and lopping of paws. A recurring element in folklore is a telltale wound that carries over when a lycanthrope transforms from wolf back into human form. We first find an example of this 2,000 years ago in Petronius Satyricon, which a soldier changes into a wolf and is seriously wounded while caught attacking cattle. Once back in human form, he is easily identified by having the same wounds on his body. Another old tale containing the telltale wound was related by a then well-known writer who specialised in writing about the bizarre. In the 16th century, Bishop Olaus Magnus, or Magus, but it is actually Magnus, that would be Magnus, was the go-to guy if you wanted to learn about everything from, sea monsters to werewolves. If he had been born a few centuries later, he would have made a great cryptozoologist, no doubt. The anecdote of Bishop Magnus comes to us from the Baltic province of Livonia, which we'll look at that a bit later on in Werewolf Legend, because there's a lot from Livonia, believe it or not. Anyway, this is what he put. The wife of a nobleman in Livonia expressed her doubts to one of her slaves whether it were possible for a man or woman thus to change shape. The servant at once volunteered to give her evidence of the possibility. He left the room, and in another moment a wolf was observed running over the country. The dogs followed him, and notwithstanding his resistance, tore out one of his eyes. The next day the slave appeared before the mistress blind of an eye. These are not isolated legends, by the way. The general concept of the telltale wound has appeared all around the world, perhaps helping along by what a good story it makes, instant proof and terror in the anecdote. Whether a hunter encounters a werewolf while tracking to protect a village, or an unlucky guy or girl crosses paths with the beast by accident, the idea is the same. The human manages to get a strike with whatever weapon he or she is carrying. The beast then flees. Sometimes this is just a gash with a blade. Other times, the human actually manages to cut off a paw. In its simplest form, the story element leads to the werewolf's direct capture. The hunter or villager returns to tell others of how he or she caught or cut the beast in a specific part of the body. Someone then claims to have seen a villager with that very same wound, matching spot as well, as such a hand instead of a paw, or ear instead of ear. Of course, whenever a wolf part is cut off, the hunter later finds that the paw of the other severed wolf part has turned into the hand, another human body part anyway, something or other. This transformation occurred sometime after the part was placed in the blaze wielder's pouch. More entertaining versions of the legend include a villager hearing the tale of the hunter and seeing the actual removed non-human body part. There's something about the severed part looks familiar, such as a ring that it has on the finger. The nervous villager then races home, only to find his or her spouse missing a hand. Other than making one wonder how a ring can stay on during human-to-wolf transformation cycle, that's a big cycle to make, right? The telltale wound legends reinforce the idea that flesh and blood werewolves can be harmed in much the same way as any flesh and blood creature. There's also another way. Remember earlier how we touched on St. Augustine, who helped the general believe that the devil has something to do with lycanthropy? Well, naturally, there comes the exorcism part of it. Could kill or cure a werewolf. So exorcism is a funny topic to comment on, being rational or irrational, but considering the mindset of those living before and during the Middle Ages, today a diagnosis of bacterial infection results in an antibiotic prescription. That's standard procedure. But in those times, when werewolves and other evil beings were believed to roam the world, do one of another, an exorcism would be needed. That was the cure. The burning times often didn't contain much mercy. By the time a suspected witch or werewolf got to trial, the authorities were not interested in helping him or her be cured. Helping someone be cured of evil was usually undertaken privately, before the person became local to the locals, let's say, before they knew. In the 13th century, before werewolf trials and executions became the choice way of dealing with the problem, there's an interesting example of a priest who, taking matters into his own hands, went, learning of an alleged werewolf in the area. Rather than ordering the suspect brought before a court, this priest apparently challenged the man to turn into a wolf before him. When the man did so, the priest began his exorcism and cured the werewolf. His theory for doing so was that even though such an evil transformation could take place, it could not corrupt the man's soul inside. It did not clear exactly what kind of exorcism was performed. The details are long lost and unavailable. There's only a few details that survive that actual event, but it is an event that was recorded. And a much more detailed example of an exorcism comes by the way of Elliot O'Donnell. He describes that in 1912, in this book, Werewolves, until recent times, lycanthropy was treated in Russia with exorcism. And he goes on to give a ritual that no priest would be able to perform with the sanction of the church, as it resembles something out of a grim war. The ritual involves creating a 7-foot magical circle related to Mercury and containing planetary symbols of that essence drawn around the perimeter. Mercury was selected because the priest believed that intelligence was the most bitter opponent of evil spirits. I'm not sure on that and whatever, but you can make arguments that for any of the planets based on how you spin their mythological and traditional attributes to your own purpose, really. Everybody's very different. But the ritual goes on to suggest adding the following mixture to a pot of water: 2 drachms of sulphur, half an ounce of castoreum, 6 drachms of opium, 3 drachms of asphodida, 1/2 ounce of ipecacuanha, and 3/4 ounce of ammonia, and half an ounce of camphor. And then you add that mixture and a bit of mandrake root, fungus, living things, namely a snake, 2 toads, and tied up into linen bags. The mixture was cruelly brought to the boil, holding a wand made of bound together ash, birch, and white poplar. The priest, magician, would pray at a makeshift altar in the magic circle while the toads indicated the water had reached a boil, no doubt by making some horrible pained croaks or other sounds. The priest would then take a cupful of the boiling liquid and use the wand to splash bits of the mixture onto the werewolf. If the latter in wolf form, or just a real wolf, I'd imagine it wouldn't take too kindly to the hot liquid anyway, assuming the priest could somewhat get away with splashing hot liquid onto such a beast. Then there is the following chant, of course. In the name of our blessed Lady, I command thee to depart, black evil devils from hell, begone. Begone. Again I say begone. This is repeated 3 times. Basically that is actually a spell that has nothing to do with being a Christian or being a priest. And that is definitely from some sort of grimoire, I can assure you. Allegedly this worked in a case that would have occurred in the first decade of the 20th century. It is so unlike Christian exorcism, and such an oddity for even the realm of occult law. It's unusual, and I cannot vouch for the right's authenticity, and I'm not going to. But if exorcism too falls under the category of psychodrama, affecting someone who believes in it, then it's easy to accept that it would work just fine on someone who only believes that he or she is a werewolf. From the boiling animals to the strange symbols, to the burning by liquid, and the rite certainly is very dramatic. And between the ritual and the preceding stuff, there's other weird things as well. And, well, I'm just going to say a disclaimer is that I don't know if that works, and I don't know how many times they would have used it, and it's not of the church, I can assure you of that. The Warrens' werewolf. Ed and Lorraine Warren are well known in the world of paranormal. Years before the recent spate of ghost hunting shows, though, the Warrens were appearing on standalone documentaries describing their encounters with the paranormal at clients' homes. For all they did for increasing the TV coverage of paranormal investigations, the Warrens tended forward with sensationalising their cases, and in the books they published afterwards, a typical cover blurb was scarier than Stephen King. While modern paranormal investigator groups are usually looking for ghosts, the Warrens immediately diagnosed paranormal cases as houses that need Jesus in them. But this isn't a book on exploiting the dangers of going into someone else's house and having to look at your mental state and their mental state and such. So let's not go there, shall we? 2. There is a well-known werewolf case the Warrens investigated, and it takes place in London, hence we have the American Werewolf in London. A man named Bill Ramsey had a strange experience as a young boy. He said that one sunny day while playing outside he felt as though he'd walked into a meat locker and his core temperature dropped by about 20 degrees. This was accompanied by a foul odour that reminded him of a time, some sort of sewer that was backed up, that kind of smell. The initial feeling faded, but it left Bill somehow changed for the rest of his life. As Ramsey grew into adulthood, he would turn from time to time to feel this compulsion to perform some violent act. Rage would swell in him, and he would even literally snap at others like a dog. In 1983, this reached the peak when he was admitted into hospital one night, bit his attending nurse, and held on to the bite with relish. He then growled and pounced around on all fours. Ramsey was eventually restrained and committed to a psychiatric ward. The Warrens descended on the case and decided that this man was possessed by a werewolf demon. They invited Bishop Robert McKenna to come and exorcise the demon. Unlike the bizarre exorcism that was a ritual rather than an exorcism, let's be honest, this was a straightforward rite, the type you've seen in movies, but with much less supernatural funfare and pea soup emissions. Ramsey tried to lash out a couple of times during the rite, but that's it. He did claim to have felt something leave his body when the exorcism was completed, but Ramsey hasn't been talking about the experience since. The psychodrama may have worked in its case, which is good for Ramsey and his family, and as a testament to the power of exorcism on someone who believes it may help. Basically, if you believe in it enough, it will happen. If you believe in it enough, it will work for you. Mind over matter. If you don't mind, it will never matter. But if you mind very much, then believe me, it's going to matter. There are other simple cures. I mean, opting out for one. If you're a voluntary werewolf, then the most obvious thing is to opt out. Don't become one, and don't rub the salve on yourself, don't do the ritual, and just don't do it. Full stop. It isn't really much of a werewolf curse, of course. That's different. You would have to go through some things for that, I would imagine. Blood. You can't discuss the dark creature of folklore without this red liquid coming up repeatedly. While mundane folk cures involve doing things like blowing on something 3 times or saying something 3 times, werewolf-related folk cures seem to always involve drawing blood from the beast somehow, and yes, it had to be done 3 times in some examples. The most common quick cure is to hit the werewolf 3 times on top of the head, ensuring that each strike draws at least 1 drop of blood. Perhaps the thinking was that the werewolf would be able to see or smell its own blood and remember its humanity. Trying this cure could be perilous, of course. First of all, you'd have to strike quickly, enough to get all 3 hits in before it turned round and actually devoured you. Let's be honest, it is a wolf. They do get incredibly angry. In Italy, it was believed that one X-shape cut to the head would do the trick. So, yeah, I'm not sure on that. I don't know where it comes from originally. Though it was found in Italy, it does not mean it originated in Italy, and let's not even consider that. Another dangerous folk cure was to cut the wolf on the back of its paws. This could also be explained as a way of sort of to get the wolf to smell its own blood, or could have developed from the telltale wound legends exampled earlier. After all, those hunters went so far as to cut off a paw, and the wolf did retreat and turn back into human form. These stories don't include a true cure, though just a temporary return to human form to allow for a more dramatic reveal of the wound. Again, cutting off the paw of a werewolf would have a most unpleasant outcome. Here, Wolfie. Another folk cure relies on reminding a werewolf of his or her human nature. This sort of involves you being able to identify who the werewolf really is. You have to address to the werewolf by name. You have to look into its eyes and teach it that it is human, that it is not transformed, that it has human qualities, without it eating you, of course. Other legends seem to indicate that you don't necessarily need to know the werewolf's name, only that it has no ordinary wolf, and just yelling at the beast, claiming that you are aware it's a werewolf, may do the trick. Can you imagine that? You have this slobbering, hellish beast running after you, and you shout at it, "You're a werewolf! I know you are! You can turn back to human," and then it just suddenly turns back to human. Not sure on that. Even throwing pieces of human clothes at a werewolf, whether the beast owns them or not, is said to remind them of their true nature, their human form. Something I wouldn't try, that's for sure. And magic charms are often quite charming to read, and some, well, they achieve mortality in pop culture. The most notable, of course, is the overused abracadabra, which was once used to cure various illnesses. It's now uttered on rabbits that are pulled out of hats in cartoons and crap like that. Really, it was a very good spell, and it was used for healing. The abracadabra is a very known spell. It's used in pyramid form for healing. It's a real spell. It's an absolute real spell. Now, charms were sort of designed to kick out the wolf spirit of a man or woman so that they could survive. The first puts 3 young girls in peril as they are asked to circle the werewolf and throw ash twigs at it while in wolf form. While doing this, they do have to chant, "Grey wolf ugly, grey wolf old, do at once as you were told, leave this man and fly away, right away, far away, where it's night and never day, times 4. You get the idea how insane this actually seems, right? Let's be honest, that's pretty insane. But if throwing twigs at a wolf doesn't seem irritating and dangerous enough, let's look at the folk cure. So the chant is, "Go fly away to the sky, devilish grey wolf, we do thee defy, out, 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 with a howl and a yell, that will carry you faster and surer to hell." Repeat 5 times while you're circling the wolf and throwing twigs at it. I think that's pretty, it's a no. I don't think the werewolf would obey something like that, and I'm not sure it would kick the wolf out of it, let's say. Wouldn't try that either. Not on any wolf. Especially not a pack of wolves. Wolves generally don't interact with humans anyway, they stay away from them, but very bizarre indeed. I just can't imagine 3 maidens, twirling around a werewolf with this hellish beast within it and wanting to murder people and throwing twigs at it and reciting that, and then the werewolf will fly away after the man. It's interesting though, nonetheless. Thank you for listening to this part of our werewolves. Yeah, many blessings.